Hey, so welcome back to yet another episode of Arewethereyet. We're so sorry about the technical difficulties in the last one, and hope that we're not gonna have it like in this session, so you can enjoy. So in this session we will talk about UX and accessibility design. I would say, as a designer myself, it's one of the most essential topics that you need to know if you wanted to level up, your skills as a UX designer or be like a good one. And now we will have Evan, who is, I would say, he's an expert in this field. He's a freelance web developer, designer, and accessibility consultant based in San Francisco, California. When not on the clock, he enjoys writing and podcasting about anime and video games, making music, designing games, and animating. So cool. Looking forward to this. So take it away. Yes, Evan.
Yep. Oh, sorry. Pulling up my notes there. There we go. Thanks, Lily. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Inclusive Design for Situational Limitations. Once again, my name's Evan Minto. I think just got the whole intro there, so I don't need to give you that. But yeah, a lot of my work revolves, like my work as a web developer and designer revolves around accessibility, or at least incorporates it. So before I define these two big terms that I'm using here in the title, I want to talk about the background image. So that is a curb cut. You've probably seen one before. They help people with wheelchairs, walkers, canes, or other assistive tools move more easily between the sidewalk and the street. So they're primarily, helpful for people with disabilities.
Oops, Evan, sorry, I couldn't hear. I couldn't see your slide.
No, you're right. You're right.
Oh yeah, sorry to interrupt.
I actually forgot to share screen.
I
should have had it sharing to begin with, so that I didn't forget to do it. Okay. Let's share it now, and then we will.
Awesome.
Go from there. Sorry for that, folks. There you go. You can see the slide now, I hope. Yeah, confirm, Lily?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Cool.
Can see now.
So anyway, let's pick up where we left off. There is a curb cut in the background. So they're primarily used to help folks with disabilities. But if you've ever had to ride your bike on the sidewalk or move a heavy object on wheels, then you are familiar with the fact that this curb cut helps a lot of people without disabilities as well. So accessibility, the traditional kind of concept of accessible design, is about people with disabilities. It's about providing equal access to make sure that folks with disabilities are, we account for both their disabilities and for their assistive technology that they're using. So accessibility is super, super important, like Lily said at the beginning. But inclusive design takes it a step further, and we expand this concept to a much broader group, namely everyone. So we're taking into account all these different axes of difference and ability across our whole audience, and using the same kind of techniques that we use for accessibility, but kind of applying it more broadly. So that means that we're designing not just for people with permanent disabilities like blindness, but also temporary ones, like someone who just got their pupils dilated at the doctor's office. And we're also designing for situational limitations. So this is kind of based on a modern view of disability, where instead of looking at it as a failure of people's bodies, we view disability as a mismatch between their tools and environment and the goals that they want to achieve. It's sort of everything around people failing to kind of get them where they are trying to go. So once we kind of reframe it in this way, we discover that actually everyone faces various limitations that manifest in similar ways to people with permanent disabilities. So we call these like limitations here. Different people will use different terms. I'm using the word limitation because disability, implies a lot more than just a sort of temporary mismatch. It has aspects of, identity, and there's a lot more kind of social context. So, having a situational limitation means that you might temporarily experience something of what it's like to be a person with disabilities, but it's really not exactly the same thing. So that's why kind of a different term here. So what initially attracted me to this concept was just that it was like a useful way of sort of expanding my way of thinking about accessibility, made it easier to think through design problems and explain those problems to abled folks on my team, like pitching it to a manager or something. But the more that I worked with this kind of spectrum of ability, the more I realized that it was actually a really powerful tool to also build solidarity and think more deeply about kind of everyone's situations. So I'm going to introduce a couple of these limitations and kind of how they might tie into some of your design work. They're going to cover things like the user's environment, their device, or even their state of mind. So let's start with one that I think is a little fun. I run into this one a lot in my my freelance work. You may or may not be aware that about 57% of web users are not able to see whatever fancy hover effect you added to your website. I was working on a recent project, and the designer I was working with had a problem where he had too much content and not enough space. You're probably familiar with that problem. And he reached for a pretty common solution, which is to put the content in a popover that would only appear on hover. So that requires hover, and being able to hover requires having a mouse. But if you add up the graph there of the mobile users and tablet users who primarily have touchscreens, that ends up being over half of the user base who actually has no access to a mouse at all. The other thing here is that this is how it kind of ties in a little bit to the more traditional accessibility side, is that users with screen readers, like people who are blind or sometimes people who have dyslexia, will also not be able to see your hover effect. So the solution here is to just not hide content behind hover. But the thing to think about is this is in very similar ways, from a design perspective, as someone using a screen reader. This is a limitation of the user's technology. It is like a genuine limitation that stops them from being able to access the same content as other people. So I have seen people try to kind of cheat this and be like, well, okay, if the screen is large, that means they're probably on desktop, so I can use hover. Or they'll go in the opposite direction and they'll say, oh, if the screen is small, then they probably have a touch screen, so I can, rely on swipe gestures for moving around an image carousel or something. Well, you can't really assume a touchscreen either in the opposite direction. On the left, there is a feature phone that has a web browser, but no touchscreen and obviously no mouse, so no ability to hover. So that's a situation where you have to rely on different modes of selecting elements, which is similar to the third one that I'll talk about here. But in the middle is another kind of like weird situation that people often don't consider, which is the user might be using a desktop browser, but have it sized all the way down to mobile size. So now you've got a mobile version of the website, but there's no touchscreen, but there is hover. So it kind of like messes with your assumptions about how these devices are typically configured. And on the right is a game console browser, which can sometimes be shown on a giant screen, but also has no touchscreen and no hover functionality. So you really want to question your assumptions about, people are using an iPhone or an Android, like these specific configurations. So next up, I've got a story here about when I used to work at anime streaming site Crunchyroll. I went to a fan convention to help out, just kind of like talking to fans and things. And we had these tablets set up for our sign up flow, and we sent one of our staff members out to the line to get in outside to sign people up for free accounts. So suddenly this sign up flow that I had built and that we'd all kind of just inherently thought of as something that people were going to pull up on their computer or maybe on their phone at home in a well-lit environment. Now they were signing up out in the bright July sunlight on a tablet. So this is a great example of how lighting conditions, including sunlight, as well as things like projecting something on a bad projector, can really mess with your colors. They can make low contrast text really hard to read and make your content kind of hard for people to understand. So the solution here is a pretty standard accessibility one: up your color contrast, and again consider kind of breaking the assumptions you might have. Don't assume that your users are in ideal situations, that they're looking at a Retina monitor in a well lit tech office, which you may be doing while you're building it. Here's one that's more related to audio. Your users might be in a loud room, like a bar, and trying to listen to some audio content that you have. I have an anecdote here. I was at a police commission meeting in San Francisco, protesting it, which is relevant for current events right now. And a bunch of activists, we got locked out of the room. So someone pulled up the meeting on a live stream on their phone, and we had about a dozen people crowding around it, but the speakers weren't quite loud enough, right? So this isn't even something where you can't have the audio on. The audio is on, but it's not loud enough. So someone turned the captions on, and then everyone could understand what was happening. So yeah, you want to add captions and transcripts. I know they can be hard, but they're really, really important for deaf users. But again, you can also justify them as helping a wide variety of people in all different situations. So my last one here is about the thoughts and feelings of your users, which you may not always think need to kind of play in directly to, accessibility conversations. Whoops, sorry. Let's go there. So especially if you're building software for stressful environments, things like airports, then you're going to be dealing with users who are in a rush. And when people are tired, frustrated, or distracted, they're less proficient at using your software. I know personally, I've definitely like hit the wrong buttons and things while using some airline website to try to check in because I was late and in a rush. So again, you want to question assumptions that you have about perfect environments and assumptions about people kind of wanting to give your website or your app their full attention. A lot of times people don't have time for that. So you want to kind of give them simple, understandable structure and guidance that really helps them, assuming that, they're going to need some help. They're not just going to be able to pay perfect attention to everything. And again, this connects to, the wider ability spectrum. This helps people with cognitive disabilities, with anxiety, people with ADHD, and people who are just speaking a different language and are trying to decipher your website, in a second language. So I want to end on the number one rule here, which is just a pretty simple one, and one that you're hopefully already following in your design work, which is meet your users where they are. It's not up to our users to adapt their technology, lifestyle, or their disability to meet our designs. It's up to us to design around their lives and help them get where they need to go. So that's it. Thank you everybody for watching. This is a really big topic. I tried to cram as much of it in here as I could, but I'm sure people have some more questions. There's a lot more where that came from. Once again, my name's Evan Minto. I'm a freelance developer, designer, and lots more, as you can see there, based in San Francisco. And I am available for some new projects. So if you would like some help with inclusive design, UX, or front-end development, let me know. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a really nice and in detail sum up of, I wouldn't say it's a sum up. I would say is an intro to users.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. I think that would be like much deeper than that. Actually, I have a question.
Sure.
So of course, currently now dark mode, it's kind of really in trend right now, right? So it's like all websites have dark mode. What do you think about this, like in terms of accessibility? Is it actually a good option to have? Because maybe people are in the bright or not, or
I think like that second to last slide I showed is really, what I always come back to. And I think dark mode is great because it gives people an option, right? And so in some cases, people just prefer dark mode. But in other cases, like dark mode actually makes it much more readable or easier on someone's eyes. And the fact that there is an option is great. Like I think every website should, in an app, should support dark mode if they can. But it's not literally just an accessibility thing. You know what I mean? Like sometimes it's just preference. But again, like I was talking about with the spectrum, a lot of times preference and like need kind of manifest very similarly, right?
Yeah, no, true. I myself, I also use dark mode a lot of times, especially because I kind of have something that I would want to check like at night, right? And it just and I'm that person who's basically like setting my like light on the level of light on my screen very, very low. And I saw also some friends also did the same. So I think it's matter of preferences, but also like kind of I think it like hurts my eye a little bit less, right. I guess.
It's like I said, it's a spectrum, right? There's like this fine line between yeah, I like dark mode better, or like light mode hurts my eyes, or like I literally can't look at light mode, right? I need to look at dark mode. And either
Exactly.
way, just giving people a way to choose is the way to go.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, we have a question here asking, how do you prioritize what to design for given limitations in resources?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So this is a common problem, right? So you only have so much time. You need to decide what to design, like what to do,
Mm-hmm.
where to improve the accessibility. One thing I tend to do, which is like, it's a delicate dance to do with your manager or your clients or whatever, is I try to stop inaccessible like designs before they get built in the first place. This
Mm-hmm.
is not like, I'll answer the rest of the question in a bit, but this is one thing that I think people should focus on. Like, don't build it inaccessibly and then prioritize how to fix the thing that you just built. I often will sort of bake the accessibility work into the estimate and say like, look, it's going to be accessible, and so if you want it, it's going to like cost more than it seems if you aren't paying attention to accessibility, right? And then you kind of prioritize features with the accessibility baked into the cost. But the other thing to think about is the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, are a great way to prioritize, because they actually give you like a tiered list of accessibility like guidelines, right? And it's also useful because you can give it to your boss, and there's like a nice checklist of like, we are compliant with this particular level, so you can comply with level A, level AA, or level AAA. And that's how I often try to prioritize, is just like, if I'm working with a client who has like a very inaccessible site, I just start with, let's hit the level A compliance first, and then we can move on to AA. And AAA is like not required, but it's nice to have. So then you just toss in a couple AAA ones that are appropriate if you make it that far. But that's kind of the way I would start to prioritize. And I would also prioritize based on like, this is a delicate thing to do, but it is probably good to prioritize based on the number of users who benefit. I just think that is sometimes a little dangerous, because sometimes folks will try to use that to justify not building accessibly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, true. This, I think you said like, yeah, it's true. It's delicate, right? Like, I mean, because one could never know like who's like,
Yeah.
like as a user, or maybe if you don't have this feature available, or your site is not accessible, maybe you're just kind of not attracting like other users at all, right? And yeah,
there's also that, actually no one asked this question, but I always like to make this clear, because I've definitely seen some people who misunderstand this. If you are trying to answer that question and you're like, well, how many users with disabilities do we have? You should stop that, because that is not a piece of information that you should know. That is like private information to your users. Sometimes people will try to track that, and it's a pretty big ethical problem to try to track that. You should really just make things accessible, assuming that you have people with disabilities using your site, because it's really not your business if they're blind or if they're deaf or something.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think this is also should be in the same line as privacy, right? It shouldn't be an option. It should be a standard, right? It shouldn't be like, hey, we have this, and therefore, we want to, I don't know, charge you more, or you have to have like like more like, I don't know, barrier in using the products because, we're doing this for you. It should be a standard. And by design is the best, like you said earlier.
If you include it, include it early on. It also costs less, like it takes less time if you bake it in right at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. So for someone who's new to this, but kind of, intrigued of going into this like deeper after the talk, where would you like suggest to start with?
There's a couple of places. I think the WCAG is useful to have in your back pocket, but not let's say the easiest reading. It's pretty dense, like kind of compliance stuff. I think the number one places I'd point people to is WebAIM, WEBAIM, which is a great website that's got like kind of readable guidelines on how to do web accessibility specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And I also would recommend a writer and speaker who I'm a really big fan of, who was actually a big part of kind of me learning about this stuff. His name's Hayden Pickering. He's got a website called Inclusive Components, which does these awesome deep dives. He has a book version too, an ebook. Does these deep dives into like how to build common components, but like taking accessibility into the design right at the beginning and like completely baking it in. And it's really like deep stuff. He's thought through like all these possible ways that someone might interact with the component.
Yeah, that's great. Do you mind typing into the chat box? And so we can have that. Yeah.
I think it's I hope I have the URL right here. I think it's webaim.org.
Okay.
And then the guy I mentioned is Hayden Pickering. He's got inclusive components. Well, let me make sure I have the right URL for inclusive components. Inclusivecomponents.design. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. So yeah, thank you so much. I hope this session will definitely like inspire like more UX designer who's in this.
Yeah, for sure.
To go deeper into this. Yeah, that would be super great. So thank you so much, Evan. Yeah. And we having 2 more sessions coming up. So stay tuned. The next one is gonna start in 9 minutes. Stay here, and then yes, you'll be redirected to room. So everyone, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks everybody for watching.
Thanks,
and for the questions as well. Later.
of the XCP Foundation, which is basically Counterparty, a method for creating tokens on the Bitcoin blockchain. And today he will be welcoming us to the precipice, and I will let him take it from there.
Hey, glad you could make it to the edge of the world. I appreciate this opportunity to share my notes. I'm still I'm still beginning as a tour guide, and so please bear with me. I might have to refer to my notes more often than expected, but also please keep all your appendages inside the vehicle. If you find this presentation moving, feel free to tip the driver. So I've been at this coastal idea bazaar for a while, gathering information here at the edge of the earth, where we're at the precipice of the unknown. This place isn't for the regular faint of heart. It's for a special breed of people. Everybody seems to have gotten here on their own accord. And yet each story, being unique, also seems to look similar in the end, whether it's the Camino de Market cycle or it's an unblazed trail, unseen trail previously not traveled. So everybody that ends up here, they prepared before they took this long journey through the Wild West to get here, to face the abyss. They've gathered all kinds of capital, social, financial, technical, and even creative. But this is a unifying hurdle, this being on the brink of this uncharted territory. So some people get here, they take the leap right away. Others, they take their time and they weigh different options and resources. So there's people here that plan, and they claim that floating or flying or submerging to be the most important ability to overcome possibilities. And so perhaps the best approach is somewhere in between. These groups of people, they form camps. They gather in groups. For example, there's groups of people that gather under authority, and the authority will sell you a fully equipped vehicle and also train you how to fly it effectively. This is one such vehicle. Unfortunately, they don't tell you until you're outside of contact with civilization that you shouldn't have brought an unexpected guest and you're going to run out of fuel soon. They also failed to mention that you need to update the operating system periodically, and that requires a full restart, turning it all the way off and all the way back on. Now, there's also other camps of groups of people who practice free and open sharing of all tools and all plans. But there's no foreman, there's no mentors, and so their vehicles are incomplete. They're not pilotable. If they are, they get away from the grips of society, get out in the nether regions, and they don't know how to upgrade. They don't really know how to pilot it that well. So I came up with this model, and it's kind of concurrent. There's a couple different things going on. So I'm going to go through the numbers here. One is a point. And so it's like me. I'm a point in time. And so I share a connection with somebody else, an idea, and that form of communication that links us together. And that forms a dimension. That's a length. So 3. If I add another person to the equation, I can really dial in my perception in that vertex. This also gives me a 2-dimensional plane or an area when I measure the distance. And so here I could close it off at 4. And the 2 people that I shared this idea with, they could talk to each other, and we could just make our own little group. But the thing is, if you add all those vertices together, those angles, each angle being our own perspective, like what's your angle, right? So then that gets us to 5, because there's only 3 angles. That's 180 degrees. That's only half the picture. 6. So we add one more person. We add one person and one more point. So with these 4 points, we're able to kind of ascertain a 3-dimensional space. We got length, width, depth, 3D. And then, okay, so that maybe that yellow isn't quite equally positioned. It was skewed, so you could see the cube maybe. Let's go to 7. And 7, it points out specifically these vertices, when everything is equidistant, equally placed, the vertices emerge that are like perspectives that don't belong to a single point, a single person, but are kind of an amalgamation. And so as these shapes, this shape continues to add points through 8, 9, and 10, these intersections emerge, more and more intersections. And yet these intersections, they facilitate these vertices around them, which are all unique perspectives. And so by the time we get to 10, we've got a myriad of perspectives, and everyone's talking to each other equally. And somewhere along the line, the 5th dimension kind of leaked out. So here we go all the way up to 10 points. We draw the lines together, and we're soak that in for a second, I guess. This is MC Escher. This is MC Escher, Gravitation, June 1952. And so with the same points that are used in the 2D, a 3D emerges. You can see with the arms and the legs reaching, they really accentuate how the shapes take form. And so what I'm implying here is that the 5th dimension, maybe not, or increasing dimension, the 4th dimension, I guess I skipped, whatever. It's this density of communication, this high density that facilitates the transmission of a signal easier. And so if we were to step back and look at this like circle as another point, back where we were to begin with, these points are like groups of society, and they link instead of by ideas, they link through ideologies. So I want to take your attention to this typical portrayal of, on the top, centralized, on the middle, decentralized, and on the bottom is distributed. So in a world where people participate, because no one stands alone, there is no one, they're not solo in one system. Every person on some level hopes that every other person can have access to their basic needs, like on the bottom in blue, food, shelter. But on the core of it, a lot of people, especially here on the edge, they have that central idea that maybe they could make a change for the better for everyone, make their mark on history, so to speak, not to be in charge, but to really make an impact. So we get into this idea that an individual can have this concept, this concept that an individual can have an idea, and that idea can go on to become an invention. So similarly, science fiction allows for people to construct more complex abstract ideas. And these abstract ideas in the realm of fiction, they're devoid of the pervasive fear of reality, the details. And with this abstract, complex idea construct through science fiction, it can really filter between these points and these ideas and get more specific. So the best case scenario, I'm looking at a vehicle that's continuously adaptive and growing. It can fly, it can float, it can submerge, and it can take on as many people as I want, and it can conform to my expectations and the needs of the environment. But this ship, this ideal ship that I'm looking at, it's really digital, and this ship is this like vehicle of scalability. How do we get into the unknown and bring more than just ourselves? So I should have practiced my tour a little bit more. I'm running out of time, but basically I want to convey this idea that some people get dreams, actual dreams, from being asleep. I had a very vivid dream where I was digging into the earth. I felt the moist earth, and I was continually replacing a flat surface and measuring it. I wanted to see where that bubble lied at all areas of the surface. I wanted to make sure it was level. And this was an actual dream. It was an actual vision. And I was laying in bed and I was coming awake, and I thought to myself, what does this mean? And in essence, it means the most sound foundation, even more level than the ground itself, will allow us to reach heights that were previously unknown. So how does this all tie together? I had some quotes that I wanted to share, specifically Bill Hicks talking about if a man wanted to fly, he should have taken off from the ground. And there was also a famous U.S. president that, as a governor of New York, coined the phrase, if you're going to reach for the stars, you should keep your feet firmly planted on the ground. And so this concept of ground, it keeps us grounded. I think instead of a vehicle, the Black Swan event is that we should be coming together to make a light tower, not a panopticon, but something that's constructed out of transparent blocks, something that can help people call back to reality, call back to where we are, and let them know that they're not alone. And when they get back, we can revise the plan together and start anew. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thanks for sharing these really poetic reflections on where we are. I mean, I don't know, I don't know in the audience. I think there's quite a few people who probably know you, but my impression also is actually from responses from my team is that it almost, if I don't know exactly what you're talking about, I still am completely entertained.
Good. So I did have a bit of an outro to put it in perspective.
Right.
The aim of this story was to place the listener into a situation that draws parallels to eliminate like a complex relationship. And I wanted the listener to kind of get in a headspace with this analogy and have it like take on a character of its own. And I really feel like there's people that in our community that thrive on novelty. And unfortunately, I'm not trained well enough to fit all the other ideas and the content in an orderly fashion, and I have yet to refine that skill, especially with the 10-minute time limit.
Right.
But I would love to publish the full text of what I tried to deliver, as well as the slides. I have a handy domain, speak.tech, and so when I add my email to mailing list, it's really eloquent. It's Duncan@speak.tech, and I don't know. I'll just have to keep paying for that domain until I die, I guess.
Duncan@speak.tech?
Yeah, there's like nothing there but a text file, like a cryptic way to read my phone number. But in the coming days and weeks, I'll link to some of these really important documents that I've written. I wrote a treatise on crypto art, delivered it at the DWeb camp last year, and then I tried to present it at the Virtual Rare Arts Festival this last month. And it's not really about me as much as trying to get a unified voice for our industry facing the outside world.
Mm-hmm. Do you think of, I mean, it's interesting because you had your dream, and I've also been having kind of, I mean, we all are having, I guess in this kind of environment, like there's a certain dream, like we're all kind of living through, like in a weird way, it's a reflection of a dream, can be bad and can be good. But in a way, do you think this kind of, this world we're looking at, I love that image, this world where we're like, there's somehow like we're in a, like in a doorway between the dream and what a dream is, actually, like bringing up like what a dream is, and you know what I mean? Like it all seems, the imagery seems very dreamlike, even though I know you're referring to things that we're doing in the digital world with blockchain and media, digital media. Is there something in it that's kind of like a living dream in a way that you would think like that you know, like when, like as in a film, like when you watch a film and you enter a dreamlike state?
So yeah, I love rotoscoping. I think the movies that were made with rotoscoping and reflecting the dreamlike state are fantastic. In particular, one of the things that came out of this metaphor as I assembled it, because I did assemble this presentation based on our conference, and I wanted to not just say, hey, be creative. I wanted to actually live creativity. I wanted to show by example. And so the thing about dreams and reality, there's often concurrent symbology that's inherently personal. And I think that's the thing about implementing dreams, is that everybody has a dream of a word that they want to aspire to the future, but then a dream is also kind of like what you do when you're unconscious. And so when I was putting all this stuff together, I had an epiphany, and that was all virtual reality that I've seen so far always has a floor. You remove the walls, remove the ceiling, and they're still selling land based on 2 dimensions. And if we're really in a virtual reality space, let's throw out the floor too. And that was kind of evident in this idea of living on the edge of the world, and just kind of tongue in cheek, like it works for flat earthers too.
Right. Well, it's also kind of this thing of trying to create a sense of place, and you know, computers don't really know a sense of place, because there is no place. Like this is the problem, I think, with interpretations of AI, is the assumption that AI is going to be a reflection of us, when actually it's going to be something completely different. You know, like we don't even know how a bird thinks. You know, like, do you ever try to think about what it is to be a bird or even an insect? Like, and we make this assumption that there's no, they don't have a there's no consciousness there, or no life. And so it's the same thing in that respect of like, what is the natural state of a virtual world, you know?
Lawlessness and unknown. Like for every known that you know, there's at least 2 or 3 more questions that you know that you don't know, or something.
Right. Yeah.
It's just like the tip of the iceberg, or you know, there's so many metaphors. The thing I like to say the most is that I ultimately detest the metallurgic metaphors in our industry, and I think that society could really dig in and understand the social dynamics if we kind of eliminated terms like chain and coin and miner. It's just like, to me, I've done research, and there's other parallels. Sure, tokenization is a great parallel for blockchain content, I believe, but metallurgy, I really rather not deal with.
I think also, like, I think on some level too, like it's also interesting, like how patterning works in general. Like it's a point to pattern, any kind of pattern, you know, like when you observe, for example, a newspaper or a magazine, or how like sort of motion graphics are put together, and there's sort of, what happens is that a language forms, people adopt that language, and then slowly, and then it just becomes a pattern. So if you go and you look at the New York Times, you see a pattern in which they communicate information, and then you become familiar with it. And after a while, I mean, for me personally, it was almost like it kind of dropped off. It was almost like having a tooth that fell out, you know? And so in a way, like, I see in our space this rapid kind of there are patterns, but they're always kind of being pushed over aside, and new patterns are being formed. So it's really hard to, like when you say we'll build a lighthouse, I can imagine that the lighthouse is constantly changing either its shape or its position. So you can never really, you can have a lighthouse, but it's not what you think of as a lighthouse. It'll never be the same thing. Like the idea of a beacon is something that it is, it can be, it's constantly being redefined in a way.
I did have a little bit of a metaphor in there that I forgot to include, that I felt like you could tell if it was a walled garden that was eventually going to become an ivory tower based on how well you digested what you ate. And so hopefully hopefully what I presented today was digestible on some level, maybe if not in the moment, and then when somebody revisits the content or reads the accompanying text or something. But I hope people are at least entertained, if not informed.
Well, from the comments, it seems like it really, more than any other of the other talks we've had so far, seems to be the most reflective. But
it's difficult for me. I figured out last time I did one of these things that I shouldn't read the comments because they're full 60 seconds off, and it messes with me.
Yeah, no, you shouldn't read it. You shouldn't read while you're reading. But I definitely feel like you've given me a huge amount of information and food for thought, as you always do, as I know you from before, and definitely a place to go to in the future in terms of thinking about these ideas. And really also very poetically so, which I think is definitely something we could use more of. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's effort. Lily and you and everyone in between. It's a great community to be part of, and I look forward to our future together.
Likewise. So next up, we will have a talk. It'll be called "What Does a Decentralized Art World Feel Like?" I feel like it's practically going in there into the same, practically just flowing in from this one to the next one. And it'll be me as the moderator, Conlan Rios from Async. It's a blockchain art platform, programmable art platform. Vax, who is a crypto artist and community, and is running or facilitating the community called Hive, and also another person who's heavily involved in the blockchain community and art maker, Sparrow. So please join us in a very short time from now.